Listeners, NerdWallet wants you to let them do the work for you. Looking for auto insurance? The Nerds will match you with top providers in your area in just a few questions. So getting the right rate for you is as simple as going to nerdwallet.com. After all, letting NerdWallet do the work is more than smart. It's genius. Not all applicants will qualify for the lowest monthly payments. NerdWallet Insurance Services Incorporated. California resident license number OK92033. The Rachel Hollis Podcast is proudly sponsored by Amica Insurance. As Amica says, empathy is our best policy. That's why they'll go above and beyond to tailor your insurance coverage to best fit your needs. Whether you're on the road, at home, or traveling along life's journey, their friendly and knowledgeable representatives will work with you to ensure that you have the right coverage in place. Amica will provide you with peace of mind. Go to amica.com to get a quote today.
How I handle my frustration has way more to do with my own coping skills than it has to do with my child's relative provocation. And I would say, our circuitry for managing our own frustration predated our kids' existence.
Hi, I'm Rachel, and in this show, we talk about everything. Life and work, health and healing, relationships with others and with ourselves. These are stories for the seekers. These are conversations for the curious. This is the Rachel Hollis Podcast. Hi guys, welcome back to the show and welcome back to a new conversation in our Mastermind series. If you've never listened to one of these before, these are where I gather the best of the best, the experts, the authors, the teachers, the thought leaders that I have interviewed over the last 8+ years of doing the show. And we pick a single topic and share 10 minutes from each expert. So you're taking a deep dive from the best minds in the business. And today is a conversation that not everybody needs, but those of us who need it really need it. We're going to talk about unhealthy relationships. If you've ever felt drained or like you're walking on eggshells or found yourself stuck inside unhealthy or toxic patterns, this episode is for you. We're diving into the powerful work of reclaiming your boundaries and healing from toxic relationships. These aren't just romantic relationships. These can be with a partner or a friend or even in your professional life. We're bringing together incredible minds to help us break this down. So you're going to hear from Dr. Ramani, Dr. Becky Kennedy, actor Tony Hale, and author Arthur Brooks. No more people-pleasing, no more self-betrayal. It's time to step into relationships that honor your worth. Let's get into it.
I've survived it myself. And ironically, that's not what got me into it. People are like, is that how you got into it? I said, actually, it wasn't well down the track. And so I understand why we're defended against this. You know, we're so programmed to blame ourselves. So yes. I've gone through it in family relationships, intimate relationships, workplace relationships, friendships, and in very significant ways. And I'd say it's altered the course of my life and certainly how I view myself. So I get that. Yeah. And, you know, my practice is focused on working with folks going through this. So I know also what's possible in terms of healing. I see it through the work I do with them. And I have a big YouTube channel that takes on sort of all elements of narcissism every day, something else I'm new musing. And we even have a healing program for survivors of narcissistic abuse who want to do a much deeper dive and really go listen to workshops and Q&As. And we have a community platform. So do it in a lot of different ways. And how I got into it, I just say, you know, I got into it originally as a researcher. I got really interested in how some people can be so difficult, awful, mean, entitled, demanding. And I originally got interested in it from the perspective of the havoc these personalities were creating in healthcare systems. These were the patients that were being demanding towards nurses, frontline healthcare practitioners, physicians, and they were leaving everyone so frazzled. I'm like, maybe we're all going to get worse healthcare as a result. So that's the research question that originally got me into it. And then in my practice, I kept seeing people talking about the same themes in their relationships. And I thought, why isn't anyone educating them about narcissism?
Yeah.
Because if they could understand the dynamics of these relationships, we could lift that self-blame so they didn't keep going through this cycle over and over again. And I'm not saying it gets easy at that point, but at least shedding a light on it was taking them out of this sort of eternal loop. And and then that kind of got me into it. Had my own revelation that this was happening to me. And then sort of thought, how do I bring this to the public? Because it's one thing to just sort of talk about it, even write about it, but how do we bring it in a much more live way to the world? And that's how I find myself here. Imagine you go to someone's house for dinner and you're like, I love how they do their kitchen and they've made this dishes and like, I'm going to go home and try this. And you go home and it's like a colossal fail because you don't have the right equipment, you don't have the right kitchen, you don't have the right setup. It's very similar in the sense that they see people I went to dinner with someone they told their spouse how they felt. Their spouse got up and helped them. So they thought, maybe I'll ask for that thing. And so they'll do a normal thing and all hell will break loose. And so then they'll very quickly blame themselves and say, I must have asked it the wrong way. I should have asked it differently. And the challenge is that every one of these clients, there was a consistency, right? The entitlement, the arrogance, the grandiosity, the variable empathy, the self-centeredness, the need for admiration and validation. That was consistent in everyone, right? But it showed up a little differently too. There's different kinds of narcissism and all of that. But at the end of the day, these clients said, for the longest time, I was trying to be in this like it was a normal relationship. But over time, the narcissistic person it almost felt like they were being indoctrinated into, you don't make your needs known. If you do, I'm going to tell you you're a bad person. That was really the formula. And so because they wanted the relationship to last, they kept silencing their own needs. And they woke up one day, 5, 10, 15, 40 years later, and recognized that they were a shell of themselves and that they were like living in this kind of subjugated state to this narcissistic person. But to the outside looking in, it honestly just looked like the relationship was fine.
Absolutely.
And there were no black eyes. There was no upturned furniture. It looked normal. And so people then kept telling themselves, oh, relationships are tough. And, my mother really loves me. And my dad had a rough backstory. But when you keep hearing things so often, I do remember there's a point in time, I sit down to do my clinical notes. And I think I had 3 clients in rapid succession. So I had to quickly do their notes, but all at once. And I'm writing the note and I'm writing another note. And I'm like, oh, shoot, I must be writing the same note twice. I wasn't writing the same note twice. The themes were so similar. Yes. It felt like I was writing the same note twice. And those were the penny drop moments that made me think like, we really need to be writing about this and talking about this more because most people are not going to end up in my therapy office.
Yeah.
We're attracted to the narcissist because they're often charming, charismatic, confident. Sometimes they can play at being very vulnerable initially. So we think, ooh, this is intimacy. They often can have their own status and credentials and good job. And narcissistic people tend to be more successful than average people. So you throw all that in the blender too, right? But then the big split comes in terms of, yeah, they're attracted to you. You're attracted to them. The things they're attracted to in you are attractive things. Frankly, you're a good source of supply because you're successful or you're smart or you're funny or all the things that make anyone attractive. Where it starts to go wonky is when we talk about the conversation about who gets stuck. Because the people who get stuck, there's where your so-called mark comes in. Mm-hmm. Because the people who get stuck are people who are very empathic, who tend to be rescuers, who want to be fixers, who might have grown up like this. And so this is the template that they've got. They're used to giving up on their own needs. They're used to giving in like, oh, this is love because this is what I was raised with. Or it becomes so reflexive. It's not like no one's signing up to say, great, love, I get to give up my needs. No one's doing that. It happens very gradually, right? And so, but it happens in this very almost automatic way. There's a certain psychological muscle memory that kind of kicks in, right? So in that way, even people who are very optimistic get stuck because they're saying it's going to change. Everyone can change. Maybe I need to love them more. You get that kind of thing. And then there's other sorts of interesting vulnerabilities at the time you meet them. And these could be things like if you're going through a transition. So for example, let's say you just broke up with someone, you moved far away, you're in a new city, you're in a new job. Those might be vulnerable. Another vulnerable moment could be if you're in a rush. So you're at an age where all your friends are getting married, or all your friends are having kids, or you feel sort of left out because everyone's doing their thing. People might feel like, okay, this is the devil I know, but they're here and I do not have another 2 years to get something going. Then there's also this contrast effect thing, which is, let's say a person, a couple of things this can go. Let's say a person came out of a relationship with someone absolutely awful. Like there's no red flags. It's just one big red banner. It's like it's a nightmare. It might be physically abusive or just awful. Everyone sees it. Everyone knows it. It's not subtle. The way narcissistic relationships can be very subtle. So when someone comes around who doesn't abuse the hell out of you, that can seem attractive, right? That's why it's always important to take long breaks after relationships are unhealthy, because you almost need to sort of clean the system out in a way. It's not easy. I mean, there's nothing I'm going to say here that's sort of like a hack for dealing with this. There's a woman named Tina Swithin who does great work in this space. She helps people deal with probably more the severe, malignant kind of narcissistic situations. So, I mean, she handles all of it, but I think her guidance is particularly important there. But one thing she came up with, everyone talks about gray rocking, right? She talks about yellow rocking because she said that yellow, and she chose yellow because she likes the color yellow, but she's like, gray rock is great, but the problem with gray rock is when you're doing it in person, it can look a little cold. It can look a little, even it's unsettling for a kid, right? So the parents just saying yes, no, and you're very flat. Yellow rock's like, yeah, no. It's that kind of thing, but there's a little bit more emotion infused. There might even be some idle conversation like, yeah, it was rainy this weekend. Are you do okay with all the rain?
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel to the child that they're in this really cold situation. Mediators don't like gray rocking. It looks cold, and they might actually feel that the gray rocking parent is the problem, even though they're doing it.
Can you explain gray rocking?
So gray rocking is a communication technique in a narcissistic relationship where, it's called gray rocking because you become as inert and dull and uninteresting and boring as a gray rock. So it's very, very unemotional and to the point communication. It's a lot of yes, no, not sure. And if it's too flat, it does feel a bit almost like it feels like its own form of antagonism, right? And so I think gray rock is great when you're writing, like a text message.
Yes.
You say yes. So now you've answered the question.
Yeah.
Right. No one can say you didn't respond to them. You did.
Right.
I said yes. But the narcissist wants a fight.
Yes.
So they want you to get into the mud with them. And if they said something like, is it true or is it not that you told the kids that they could bring the this to the that and the that to the this and their whole word salad situation, and you might write, it's true. I said they could bring their towels.
Yes.
And that's it. They're done. And they're like, what happened? But you answer the question. It was really, did you tell them they could bring towels or whatever? Or is it blah, 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 could they watch that movie? And you say, yep, I said they could watch that movie. Like that's the fact. You strip it down to fact, right? That works great in writing, but not as great in person when there's kids and others involved. Gray rocking can work at work where you can sort of be kind of to the point. But yellow rocking is this, again, it's a little bit like, hey, how's everyone going? You might be thinking like, I need this conversation to be done. I can't stand this person. But when you're co-parenting with a narcissistic person, it's nightmarish, especially if you have shared custody, because you may know when your kids are with that parent, they don't enjoy it. Yeah. They come back a lot more dysregulated. Their homework's not done. They're confused. I mean, in extreme cases, you feel like I'm getting a different kid back, and it takes days to put them back together just to send them right back into that situation.
Yes.
And no family court in the world is going to listen to that.
Right.
Family court is about parents' rights.
They present so perfectly in the hearing, and they're this upstanding citizen that everybody loves,
even when they're not an upstanding citizen. But
it's so crazy.
Yeah, it is. And so family court is for parents' rights, not children's rights.
Yeah.
And so they're not really worried about the well-being of the child. They're worried about coming up with a settlement that's equitable.
Exactly.
And so for a lot of people, this is the most painful decision of all. Do I stay in this marriage because at least then I'm around my kids all the time? Or do I leave it? It's really, really difficult.
Yeah.
Every day, thousands of Comcast engineers and technologists create connectivity solutions that change the way we work, live, and play. Like Kunle, a Comcast engineer who is focused on revolutionizing the in-home Wi-Fi experience today and for the next generation. Learn more at comcastcorporation.com/Wi-Fi.
I love finding ways to commemorate really important experiences in my life. Usually, if you look at my wrist, you will see it stacked with bracelets that do just that. And if you want to celebrate your unique story, check out Pandora Jewelry. They're crafted with meaning and exquisite artistry, from sparkling lab-grown diamonds to vibrant enamels, personalized engravings, and their iconic charms. Pandora offers endless ways to express what's in your heart. Every day is a chance to be love. Let Pandora Jewelry remind you that love starts with you. Shop in-store or online at pandora.net.
I think there's a couple areas of disruption. So I'll start with the core thing, which are maybe just the ideas around parenting. As a clinical psychologist, I was trained in how to work with parents who are struggling with things with their kids, right? So a kid is hitting, a kid is being rude, a kid doesn't listen. And I was trained truly at a very esteemed place about how to teach the parents how to give a timeout, how to give a consequence, how to give a sticker chart, how to ignore, how to praise, how to kind of extinguish the bad and kind of encourage more of the good. So that was some of my private practice. I was like delivering that very, I would say, behavioral approach to parenting. But then seriously, my next session of the day, I'd see Rachel, someone like you in therapy. And it just started to strike me. Like, let's say you came to me and you said, Becky, I was, had a bad week. I yelled at my mom a lot. I yelled at my partner a lot. I yelled at someone at work a lot. I just can't imagine I'd say, Rachel, give me your phone. No phone for the week. And I can't believe you'd be like, oh, this is going to help me so much. Oh my goodness, I have the best therapist in the world. And I just started to see, oh my goodness, we make so many assumptions about what kids need to kind of do well in life. And all of those assumptions are around the way we view their behavior. But then in adulthood, people spend their lives as adults unwiring, healing, figuring out how to be the sturdiest, most confident version of themselves, and basically undoing a lot of the patterns that were put in place in our earliest years. And I was like, wait, are we creating the problem first and then solving the problem later? What if we raise kids in a way that, don't get me wrong, they're still going to have issues. Like my kids will definitely have issues, okay? But definitely all of them. But what if we wired our kids from the start with the skills, with the resilience, with the confidence to be the types of adults so many of us are fighting to be? If you don't punish a kid's bad behavior, you're reinforcing that behavior. Okay. I was like, well, I don't know if that's true. Like, if that's true, then it makes sense why I'm giving them a timeout. But what if that's not true? And then I thought about in my adult life, like, I'm married, I love my wonderful husband, truly. And I'm thinking about times I don't know, I haven't been so great with him. I've been short or I've said something I wish I could take back. He doesn't punish me. And I don't assume he's encouraging my behavior. Like, if he says, Becky, whoa, like the way you said that was super intense and really not okay. But I also feel like there's probably something you're upset about that's driving it. And I actually want to get to the bottom of that because that matters the most. Can we talk it out? I just can't imagine I'd be like the sociopathic person who's like, my husband really lets me get away with yelling at him. It's such a sociopathic thing to think. Like, us humans are better than that. So that's an assumption. Praise and sticker charts. You have to do that to get kids to have manners. And, listen, why? If I think about why I listen to someone at work or again to like my mom or my husband, like they're not giving me a sticker. And if my husband, again, said, Becky, I have a great idea. Every time you do something nice for me, I'm going to give you a sticker. And after 10 stickers, I'm going to give you a diamond necklace. Like, I'd be like, all right, that's a nice necklace. But I honestly, at my core, Rachel, I'd be like, is our relationship in such a bad place that you have to do that? So again, I'm like, what if that's not true? And I was left with one thing. I actually was left with two things that I felt were true. One, kids come into this world good inside. I just don't know a baby who's like, I am really going to give it to my parents for the rest of their life. Like, I just don't buy it. That's one. And the other thing that really struck me as the truth of, I think, 99% of the problems we see with kids is that kids are born with all of the emotions and none of the skills to manage those emotions. And I can't overemphasize this because I really think it explains 99% of what we see with kids. All the emotions, none of the skills. That is so vulnerable. You are just this ball of explosive emotions. And whenever you have an emotion without a skill that matches it, it comes out in bad behavior. That's true for adults too. The only reason I say something not so nice to my waiter when he says, oh, we're out of the special, is because I was so disappointed. I, at that moment, didn't have a skill to manage the disappointment. So it comes out in something not so, kind. But the behavior, me not being nice to the waiter, my kid hitting, that is literally not the problem. That is a symptom of the problem. And the problem is that our kids weren't born with the skills. So what do? We send them to their room for not having the skills that would have prevented the bad behavior, somehow thinking they're Googling how to learn the skills while they're sent to, I don't even know what the theory is. We're punishing them for not having skills instead of, why don't we teach them skills? What if we taught our kid the skills? Because the emotions aren't the problem. It's the lack of skills. Kids are born good inside and they're born without skills. We have to always keep in mind that they're good inside. We definitely have to respond to bad behavior. And we can go over how. We have to teach them the skills. If we punish them for not having something they never were born with, we create adults who don't have skills to manage emotions. Hello. And who feel shame and self-blame all the time. Hello. That is the world we kind of live in. And I feel passionately that we can actually change this. We're already changing this. So I'm incredibly hopeful. Repair is the act of going back to a moment that felt bad, taking responsibility, stating what you would do differently the next time. And repair is so powerful in our relationships. Like, we know this over and over in our adult relationships. The reason I think repair is different from an apology is so many times a stereotypical apology looks to kind of shut a conversation down. Hey, I'm sorry I yelled at you. Okay, we're good. Let's move on. Like, that's what apology might sound like, where a good repair actually opens one up. And the thing I want parents to know about repair is it really gives you kind of like a magical ability. Like, if you think about your kid's life as like a book, and then there's a chapter, and the chapter was titled, My Mom Freaked Out at Me because I said I didn't like dinner and yelled at me, and it felt kind of scary because nice mom turned into scary mom. That's a chapter that without a doubt was in my own children's book, okay? So you're not alone. What I get to do with repair is I kind of get to go back to the ending of that chapter. I get to like rewrite the ending. So then instead of my mom yelled at me and I felt pretty scared given I depend on my mom for, my whole life, it ends with, and then she reconnected to me. And then I knew it actually isn't my fault when people act out. And then I had a chance to share with her, yeah, that actually did feel bad. And I got to hear what she's working on. And then instead of the title being My Mom Turned into Scary Mom, the whole title of that chapter changes to something kind of uncomfortable and scary happened. And then I better understood it. I realized it wasn't my fault. And I actually probably felt even a little closer to her after. I mean, literally the whole story changes.
Yeah.
I always think that if we do one thing in a day, just finding your kid and sharing, where it's like, it probably is going to sound like my typical repair. Hey, I yelled at you earlier. I'm really sorry. And the truth is, it's never your fault when I yell. And look, I'm going to get frustrated with you. But what I'm working on is staying calm and speaking to you respectfully, even when I'm frustrated. And I want to get ahead of a question because a lot of parents, and I totally get this, they'll look at me, they'll be like, okay, but like Dr. Becky, like it kind of was my kid's fault, right? Like they were being, like kind of like, do I really have to say that? But this is what I think, again, the life lesson is. And everything we do at Good Inside is what I would say is very long-term greedy. My parenting approach for my kids and anyone else's kids is very long-term greedy. I promise you our approach brings a ton of short-term wins, but what I'm really interested in is your kids being resilient, confident, 18 and older, because that's when the stakes are really high, okay? Number one, the reason why I yell at my kid, I think it's because I cooked dinner and my kid said, oh, chicken again, right? I'm like, well, if they didn't say that, I wouldn't have yelled. I guess that's true. But that's not why I yelled. That's why I felt frustrated. Yeah, okay. How I handle my frustration has way more to do with my own coping skills than it has to do with my child's relative provocation. And I would say our circuitry for managing our own frustration predated our kids' existence. It probably is hard for me in general to deal with disappointment or when something doesn't go my way. And when I fast forward, I don't know, I think about the patterns with my kid and how that's going to impact the patterns they have with other adults, like a partner. I just picture, I don't know, let's say it's my son who, I don't know, gets married and their partner's like, oh, I was supposed to pick up food. I didn't know that, and I don't know, something disappointed. My son like yells at his partner. I just can't imagine when I hear him say like, well, it's your fault that I yelled at you. Because if you had just remembered dinner, like I wouldn't have done that. I'd be like, oh my God, that is literally the creepiest, ickiest thing I've ever heard. But I kind of put that in place because if I tell my kids all the time, well, if you hadn't complained about dinner, if you had just gotten your shoes on when I asked, I wouldn't have yelled at you. Then what I'm really saying is
my behavior is your fault.
That's exactly right. That's right. And I just don't know any of us who want to overhear our like 30-year-old, 50-year-old child ever say that.
Right.
What we want them to say is, look, we had a miscommunication. But either way, it's almost irrelevant. I put that on the side. Like I was frustrated. I was like really, really hungry and was like really looking forward to you bringing home pizza and you didn't. Still, there's a much better way to handle that. And that's on me. And that's not just what I owe you. I owe myself better managing that situation. I'm sorry. I'm going to work on that. That is a repair.
Every day, thousands of Comcast engineers and technologists create connectivity solutions that change the way we work, live, and play. Like Kunle, a Comcast engineer who is focused on revolutionizing the in-home Wi-Fi experience today and for the next generation. Learn more at ComcastCorporation.com/Wi-Fi.
Coming into the new year, it was time for a big reset for our family. We had so much fun over the holidays and we indulged in sugar and all the stuff we normally wouldn't have, which is why I love coming back into a routine with Thrive Market. Thrive Market lets you easily find trusted, family-friendly brands and shop based on your needs. So things like low sugar or gluten-free, organic or high protein, you can filter them without the hassle of grocery store trips. Plus, with the Healthy Swap scanner in the app, you can scan a product you already buy and get instant recommendations for cleaner, healthier alternatives. Ready for a junk-free start to 2025? Head to thrivemarket.com/Rach and you'll get 30% off your first order plus a free $60 gift. That's THRIVE market.com/Rach. thrivemarket.com/Rach.
This is something I have to remind myself. I can cognitively know what you're talking about, but in my heart, in my emotional life, and things that are triggered from my very early age, I still can think that. I can still have that thought. I mean, you've heard the stories of people who win Oscars, people who get Olympic gold medals, and then they go into a depression.
Yes.
Because as much as they might cognitively know that this is not going to satisfy, there's really that very deep internal feeling that's like, maybe. Maybe. And then they hit the wall and it's like, ooh. I mean, I was working with this therapist. I mean, he obviously didn't give names, but he said he's worked with a lot of people who have reached very high heights and he works through a lot of anxiety and depression with them. I would like to say that I did it very productively and I handled it really well and all this stuff, but I was just kind of a scattered, I felt really needy. I was in a space where I was like, oh, is this gonna work? Like, if that person likes me, is this gonna work? And I was still in a really frazzled state. And it really wasn't until after Arrested was done that I really started to really hammer down on therapy and start to kind of sift through it. And I've mentioned this many times on podcasts, so I apologize if anybody has heard it. Not that everybody listens to my stuff all the time. But I did this children's book out of it called Archibald's Next Big Thing. And it's about this little chicken who gets this card in the mail that says your big thing is here. And he's like, where? And he goes on all these crazy adventures. And every time he's on an adventure, he's like, I got to get to my next big thing. And this bee comes along, and the bee's like, you got to just be, man. You got to just be. And then in the end, he realizes that the big thing really is here. You know, my big thing is talking to you right now. But in my business, at least, and I can't speak for everybody else's businesses, but you're always getting the question, what's next for you? What's next for you? Or you can live in the kind of future and the next, which is not, again, ambition is not bad, but I'll tell you what's not encouraged is that waking yourself up to the now, you know, like, and we've heard this over and over, but during the time I started doing cognitive behavioral therapy, when I started to really dig in, and just that thing of how much I was living in the what if, how much I was living in the future. He would say things like, you have to wake yourself up 100 times a day to where you are. He would say, activate the 5 senses when you feel yourself you're not there. Ground yourself. Just things like that. And again, these are things that I still have to do. I just, you know, I was just in Inside Out 2, and there's a time in the end when she has this kind of like a panic attack. And you see when she's coming out of it that she begins to activate her 5 senses. You know, she starts to hear the ice. She starts to look outside the sun. She starts to smell. You know, it's like, that's kind of what I was doing during that time. I also found myself thinking, you know, you're going to die.
Yeah.
You know?
Memento mori, man.
I mean, it's like
So
you
real.
and I are, and that sounds like a very basic thing to say, but I can live in this space where I forget that. And I'm not saying that we want to stay in this kind of dark space and but I find myself sometimes, I used to do this more and I don't, but I kind of enjoy going to cemeteries a little bit. There's this wake up that happens in me that's like, that's unavoidable. And I'm giving a lot of power. I can't speak for anybody else, but I'm giving a lot of power to these things that I want to achieve, and almost to kind of keep grabbing. I'm reading this book called Falling Upwards by Richard Rohr. And he talks a lot about the first half of life, kind of creating the container, or understanding the container, like what's my identity? What's, you know, where is these things? And then the second half of life is like really kind of seeing the substance, filling that container. You kind of find the script in the beginning, and the second half of life, you're beginning to almost act out the script because you understand a little more. But a part of that is like, yeah, I've been giving a lot of power to these. I won't say they're minors. I think they're very valuable, but I've missed the majors. I haven't paid attention to the majors, and that's a daily exercise for me. But when your identity is so built up by the business, or so built up by people coming up to you and saying, oh my gosh, you're amazing, I love you. The fact is, inevitably, that's going to go away one day. When that goes away, I can understand that these people genuinely don't know who they are because they have been defined by people around them. That's work I have to do, even having gotten that quote, you know, celebrity thing later. I still have to be able to conscious of like, hey, that's not who I am. So I don't tell them this, but in my head, I'm thinking, I'm love. Even if if another person never comes up to me, or if I get crapped upon in this business, I have the same love and value as when I did before. Play about 3 years ago, maybe it was 4, it was right before COVID hit. And every night, it was a one-man play pretty much. And towards the end, this other actress came in. But most of like about 45 minutes, it was just me on the stage. And I remember thinking every night before going on, oh, tonight's the night I'm going to have a panic attack in front of 1,000 people. Like there was this real like, oh, well, you know, it might not have happened last night, but it's going to happen tonight. And this therapist that I was working with would always say, hey, you know, when you start kind of feeling that or hearing that voice, like, why don't you just start turning it and saying, hey, thanks for being here. I know you're trying to help. I'm going to go do the play and I'll be right back. Because what I used to do is be like, no, I'm good. No. And I would just try to like fight my way out of it. And once I started doing that, there was this kind of, and again, Inside Out kind of affirmed that. It was just this more compassion given to these emotions and more like embracing them rather than trying to push them away. And it really changed my perspective on fear and anxiety big time. Lisa D'Amour, who wrote Untangled, that book Untangled.
Oh, yeah.
She was a consultant on Inside Out too. She was a lot of talk about kind of, hey, let's just kind of change that perspective on emotions. And that's actually, I'm going to read that. I also like that you said it was small because I'm not a huge reader. But this whole kind of watching that movie, this whole kind of, again, communal aspect of like, these are all parts of me, you know, there's not a bad part. And that's,
Yes.
I definitely put anxiety and fear in that bad part. Fear is a tricky thing in anxiety because it can kind of creep in so many different forms. And like, even if I was with an ensemble, if that was my first time, I could see myself going, oh, I don't want to screw that up for them. I'm going to forget my lines and then they're going to be pissed at me and then I'm going to screw up the show. You know, it's amazing how that can kind of weave itself into anything. I'll never forget the first night I did it, which was a preview, and my wife came and she came backstage and was just crying. And she's not a big, you know, she's not a very emotional person like that. And it was so sweet because she was just like, she knew how nervous I was, and just that kind of like relief of like getting through it.
Do you feel like having done something like that was so scary for you, but you got through to the other side, did it change your perception of yourself?
Yeah. I mean, what it showed me is how much power I had given to not doing it. Like, just that kind of how much power you give to the what if. And I don't know, and then once you just kind of tackle it and take that first step, you know, it just kind of diminishes that kind of stigma of it. Another thing I would tell students who are wanting to get in the business is I say, invest in your community before you invest in your career. Because I think back at the time, like after Arrested Development, I did a little show called Andy Barker PI. I did 6 episodes on that, but then there was a good kind of 5-6 years of not have steady work. And during that time, I remember talking to my wife and thinking, are we going to have to sell the house? Like not really knowing what was going to happen. And I look back on that and there's many things that were so valuable. And one is community, is just that community around you that see you beyond how the business sees you and seeing like your true value and just coming alongside you and saying, hey, keep going. Or I had my daughter in 2006, right after Arrested Development was canceled. And I just, not only just having such a gift of her, but it was a focus point. Like it was, you know, I wasn't working, but I had to keep my wife and I had to keep this baby alive. And it was like, you know, I remember just that division of like, oh, I'm not working, but like, hey, let's go to the playground. And that power of just, again, the simplicity and routine. In a lot of support groups, they say the next right action. What's the next right action? And it's like, I would wake up and I would have no clue where, you know, how the finances are going to work out. But the next right action is to take my daughter here or to go here. And that's the next step. And then you just kind of keep going that way.
I mean, everybody wants to be happier, but people who have a social science toolkit and who feel a happiness deficit, these are the people who specialize in happiness. And that was my case too. Happiness is hard for me. It's not like horrible. It's not like nobody needs to, you know, call 911, but it's not, you know, I'm lower in positive affect and higher in negative affect than a lot of people.
Meaning that you tend to gravitate more towards negativity or pessimism?
Well, it's not even pessimism. It's melancholia, as they used to say in the Middle Ages. Yes. It's just kind of sort of a blue outlook. And look, I come from gloomy parents and gloomy grandparents, and half of your baseline happiness is genetic. We actually know this from identical twin studies where identical twins are separated at birth and adopted into separate families. So it's a statistical test. It's not done on purpose. That would be unethical, obviously.
Except for that one documentary with the triplets.
Yeah. Oh,
Have
right.
you seen that one?
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah.
Really upsetting. Sorry.
I know. What, you mean the 3 Identical Strangers? That one?
Yes.
Yeah. The 3 brothers?
Yes. And
super heavy.
Yeah.
Super heavy.
Yeah.
I know. And it turns out that they all have the same set of psychiatric conditions, et cetera, because these things are largely inherited.
Yeah.
Between 40 and 80% of every personality characteristic is genetic, and your baseline mood is half genetic. And so that means it's super important to understand that so you can manage your genetics. I mean, half of your tendency toward alcoholism and drug abuse is genetic too.
Yeah, for sure.
But all that means is that you need better habits. If you've got a proclivity toward it, you know, I've got this super technology for turning that to 0. It's called don't drink. You know?
Yeah.
And the same thing is true for your happiness. If it turns out you've got gloomy parents, you should study happiness so that you can have the right kind of habits. And so I, you know, realizing that maybe a little later than I should have in my 40s, I'm like, I'm going to turn my toolkit on this thing. Well, it's my wife. You know, she's like, don't you have a PhD? You know, why aren't you using it, you know, for something useful, like not making me miserable?
Yeah.
And so I actually I actually turned the whole toolkit toward trying to understand what kind of a strategy I could put together for my own life so that I could live happier and share these ideas with other people. And I changed my career completely. I was a CEO of a think tank, a big nonprofit think tank in Washington, D.C., and I quit my job. And
At what age were you?
I took that job when I was 44 and I quit when I was 55. And in the last 7 years of that, I was writing a personal research-based science plan for getting happier for me. And I had this big envelope and notes and, notebooks, and Esther, my wife, found it. She's like, "This is a book." It's not the kind of stuff I write books about. She said, "I think somebody might be interested in this."
Yeah.
And I published it. It was From Strength to Strength, about how you can get happier as the years go by. And it turned out to be something that people wanted to read. And I became so enthusiastic about it. I said, this is not right for me to keep doing something else and have this be my personal plan. I want to write, speak, and teach about this for literally the rest of my life. I rewrote my personal mission statement, which is I want to use science and ideas to lift people up and bring them together in bonds of happiness and love. That's what I want to do, and I'm going to do that for the rest of my life. And so I left in 2019, and I've been teaching at Harvard and writing in the Atlantic and writing books and talking about the thing that people really want the most, which is getting happier. Traditionally, women are happier than men, is what we find in almost every category. So if you look at marriage, you find that married women are happier than married men, that single women are happier than single men. Widowed women are way happier than widowed men. It's like my wife looked at that one, she's like, huh. The only group of women that tend to be less happy are divorced women who have kids in the home, because it's incredibly stressful. It's just tons of work. So your life has more and more and more meaning, but less and less and less enjoyment. And that's one of the reasons in your 30s and 40s it can be so difficult, and moment-to-moment happiness can be hard to come by. That's one of the reasons. And, it's funny because, I remember in those years, my wife did a lot more than I did in bringing up the kids, because I was always working. I was running a company or whatever. But I tried to be home as much as possible. And it was stressful. It really was stressful. And then it's weird because they grew up. Now I'm a grandfather.
Are you really?
Uh-huh.
How's that?
Different.
Yeah.
So it's the same. It's weird. It's like, it's better.
Yeah, I'm sure you could give them back to somebody.
I know. It's really, really great. And I didn't sort of think that was going to happen, but of course it does, because they grow up. And my kids got married young. I have my 25 and 23-year-old sons are both married.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my 20-year-old daughter's not married yet.
Yeah.
But who also is adopted, by the way.
Cool.
Like your youngest.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah. But it's a different kind of a sensation. But I'm more conscious of the fact that that's going to go fast.
Mm-hmm.
So it's because there's less pressure, and so there's more moment-to-moment happiness and more meaning. So you're going to love it when the time comes.
I didn't mean to interrupt,
no.
but can you explain what you mean? What's the difference between happiness and moment-to-moment happiness?
Well, it's the happiness that you're experiencing right now versus over the arc of your life.
Got it.
So what you'll say is, so I could ask you two questions like, Rachel, how happy are you this morning? Or I could say, how happy are you this year?
Yeah.
Or how happy is this decade? And you'd have to think about all three of them in different ways. You could answer the first one most sort of like that.
Yeah.
You'd say like, Nyeh.
Yeah.
It's like, and this year, it would be something you'd be thinking about the events of this year. You moved.
Of course.
Really, really stressful, but you're living in a place where you really want to live. And so you'd be thinking about the sums, like the cost and benefits. And this decade, like, been a crazy decade for Rachel Hollis.
Yeah, it has.
Uh-huh.
For
And so you'd have to think about that. You'd have to think, it's like there's kind of the party line on how happy I should be. And there's the happiness that I am enjoying.
Yeah.
And that's how we'd go into that if we were trying to calculate that one.
Well, and what's the difference between contentment and happiness?
Contentment, see, the funny thing about happiness, there's so many words around it. Right. So let's sort of define the terms. So happiness is basically a combination of three things. It's sort of the macronutrient profile of happiness. So if you're going to do your macros in food, it's protein, carbohydrates, and fat. The macronutrients of happiness are enjoyment, satisfaction, and purpose. These are the three parts of happiness.
I guess I'm really happy then.
Yeah, because you've got those three things.
Those three things.
Yeah, and contentment is really it's kind of the convergence of satisfaction and meaning in your life, satisfaction and purpose in your life. Enjoyment is interesting because enjoyment is actually hard to get. Most people will stop at pleasure, and pleasure never brings happiness. Pleasure is this limbic phenomenon. It's this neurophysiological phenomenon. It's a signal to you that it's going to help you survive. You can pass on your genes, but it will never lead to happiness because it's fleeting.
Pleasure never brings happiness.
It does not. What you need is pleasure plus people plus memory. So for example, if there's something that gives you pleasure but you're alone, it's a problem because that will lead to addiction and won't lead to happiness.
Whoa, that's so good.
Yeah, and so that's why Anheuser-Busch doesn't do an ad for beer that shows a guy pounding a 12-pack alone in his apartment. Because that's pleasure, and that will not bring that guy happiness.
Right.
But in the ad, the guy is drinking a beer with his brother and friends, and they're having a great time and loving each other on a fishing trip and making a memory.
Yes.
Pleasure plus people plus memory equals enjoyment, and that leads to happiness.
Oh my God. I actually didn't know this is something that could be broken down in this way, but obviously it can.
Yeah. These are the equations. I do this on all the components of happiness because my job is to teach people how to get more of it. And so you can't just be like, it's a thing. You can't be really philosophical about it. You got to be very specific about it. And each one of the macronutrients of happiness has a formula like this, and you can check yourself to know whether you've got the right strategy in your life. Yeah, so most people, I can usually diagnose what's going wrong in people's lives. If they have lots and lots of pleasure, but not enough people and memories in their life, I can actually say, you're going toward addiction. You don't need to get rid of these sources of pleasure. You need to dial them down and put in more opportunities to be sociable, to be in communion with other people, and to be more conscious of what you're doing, such that you can be engaging the prefrontal cortex of your brain and not just your lizard brain. Wow. Lizard brain says, beer feel good. Yeah. Right? And that's not the way to consume it. Now, some people, they will wire their brains, their dopaminergic pathways, the neuromodulators in their brain, so that they have to hit the pleasure lever again and again and again and again. And those are the people who have to stop doing that and to not use that source of pleasure ever again because they get, frankly, too good at it. Yeah. And so there's a lot of neuroscience that goes into this whole thing too. I have a rule, except under extraordinary circumstances, I never eat alone. I don't eat alone. Now, some people live alone. So what are you going to do? You know, I saw this book called Microwave Cooking for One. Oh, I almost started crying when I heard this. But I get it. At least use the stove. I know. I'm alone a lot because I'm on the road and I'm not always traveling with, and you know what it's like when you're on the road alone. And there's sometimes when it's just really, really refreshing to go to a restaurant and eat and think and, et cetera. But as a rule, I'm not gonna eat the most delicious food by myself. I'm gonna have a rule of eating with other people, such that it is a social experience. And when I'm doing it, I'm gonna be doing it while doing something memorable. Yeah. I'm gonna have a conversation that's memorable. So add these rules to it, and it will change your life. You don't have to be on some sort of crazy, subtractive, limiting diet, because those things never work. Right. 95% of diets don't work. And there's a reason for that too. I mean, we actually understand the neuroscience of how that works, not just the lipid profiles, et cetera, but when the scale's going down, it's the benefit is higher than the cost of not eating what you like. But when you hit your goal, your reward is never eating what you like ever again for the rest of your life. Congratulations. Yeah. And so the whole point is you have to change your orientation toward the source of the pleasure, whereas drinking or intimacy with your partner or what you're actually doing with your eating habits or if you're going to Vegas, don't go to Vegas by yourself. Right. Don't sit in front of a slot machine by yourself. You're hitting the dopamine circuit in your brain again and again and again because you want that pleasure reward. Yeah. And it's not going to bring you happiness. It's going to bring you misery.
The Rachel Hollis Podcast is produced by me, Rachel Hollis. It's edited by Andrew Weller and Jack Noble.
TaxAct knows filing your small business taxes can be a nightmare, like the kind where you're being chased by a giant W-2 form and you're running and running, but you can never reach the submit button. Or something like that. So, TaxAct offers Expert Assist with live tax experts to make filing taxes less scary. Now, you can just have pleasant dreams about being chased by other giant, non-threatening paperwork. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.